Picture this. You're standing in the Tower of London on a cold May morning in 1536. The sky is heavy with grey clouds, the air damp with the smell of stone and iron. Ahead of you, a small wooden scaffold has been built in the courtyard. Soldiers line the walls, their armour glinting faintly in the dim light. A crowd has gathered, nobles in silks and jewels, servants in plain cloth, all whispering, their faces pale with anticipation. And there, in the very centre of it all, stands a woman. She is slim, elegant, her dark eyes steady. She's dressed in a gown of deep grey damask, trimmed with fur, with a simple cloak around her shoulders. Her hands are folded calmly, almost too calmly, as though she is forcing herself into composure. She removes her headdress, revealing long dark hair tucked neatly beneath. This is Anne Boleyn, the former Queen of England. And in just a few moments, she will be dead. But here's the chilling part. The story of Anne's execution is not just about one woman's tragic end. It's a story of betrayal, manipulation, and power games so brutal they still haunt history. It is a story of how love turned into hatred, and how the crown that lifted her up became the weapon that destroyed her. Stay with me, because what you're about to hear is not the sanitized tale you might have read in school. This is the darker, shocking truth about Anne Boleyn's execution, and why it continues to echo through the centuries. Anne Boleyn's story does not begin with blood. It begins with fascination. Born around 1501, she was not destined for a throne. She was the daughter of a diplomat, Thomas Boleyn, and was raised partly in the courts of the Netherlands and France. There, she absorbed the elegance of European culture, the art of flirtation, the subtle craft of conversation. Unlike many women of her age, Anne was educated. She read, she wrote, she thought. When she returned to England in the 1520s, she wasn't just another lady at court, she was magnetic. People noticed her sharp wit, her confidence, her eyes that seemed to hold secrets. And soon, King Henry VIII noticed her too. At the time, Henry was married to Catherine of Aragon. They had one surviving child, a daughter named Mary, but no surviving sons. And Henry wanted, no, needed, a male heir. To him, the future of the Tudor dynasty depended on it. When Anne entered his orbit, she was unlike any woman he had ever encountered. She refused to be just another mistress. She denied his advances, held him at a distance, and in doing so, ensnared him completely. Henry was obsessed. He promised her the world, and she wanted more than jewels or fleeting favor. She wanted a crown. But here's where the story takes its first dark turn. To give Anne what she wanted, Henry would need to do the unthinkable, cast aside his queen of nearly 20 years, break with the Pope, and sever England from the Catholic Church itself. And he did. When Henry VIII finally married Anne in January 1533, he believed he had triumphed over fate itself. He had broken from Rome, declared himself the head of the Church of England, and crowned Anne as queen. The celebrations were lavish, the promises golden, but beneath the glitter, cracks were already forming. Anne was ambitious, yes, but she was also vulnerable. Her crown was built not on stability, but on defiance. Every step she took into power created enemies, loyalists to Queen Catherine, defenders of Mary, conservative nobles who despised Anne's reformist leanings. And then came the greatest pressure of all, the same weight that had doomed Catherine before her. Anne needed to give Henry a son. At first, there was hope. In September 1533, Anne gave birth. The court buzzed with anticipation of a prince. Bells were prepared to ring, bonfires ready to blaze. But when the child was born, the announcement brought a stunned silence. It was a girl. Her name was Elizabeth. Henry was disappointed, though he masked it at first. He told the court that if Anne had borne a healthy daughter, surely a healthy son would follow. But with every passing year, every miscarriage, and every stillborn child, Anne's hold on the king's heart began to weaken. And here is where the story grows darker. Anne was not just a wife. She was a political symbol. Reformers saw her as a Protestant champion, while conservatives saw her as a usurper. rumors swirled constantly. Some called her a witch, claiming she had enchanted Henry with sorcery. Others whispered about her temper, her sharp tongue, her refusal to play the meek and silent role expected of queens. Henry, once dazzled by her boldness, now grew weary of it. And into that growing shadow stepped another woman, Jane Seymour. Jane Seymour was everything Anne was not. Gentle, quiet, submissive. Where Anne had fought, Jane yielded. Where Anne had provoked, Jane soothed. By 1536, Henry's interest in Jane was clear, and for Anne, the danger was immediate. Because Henry VIII was not a man who tolerated obstacles, if he wanted something, or someone, he would find a way to take it. Anne must have felt the noose tightening even before she saw it. She had enemies at court, rivals waiting for her fall, and a king who had grown restless. But here's the chilling part. When Henry decided to rid himself of Anne, he did not simply discard her. He chose to destroy her, utterly and completely. The charges leveled against Anne in May 1536 were shocking, even by Tudor standards. She was accused of adultery with multiple men, including her own brother, George Boleyn. Worse still, she was accused of conspiring to kill the king. The accusations were grotesque fabrications, twisted lies crafted to ensure her downfall, but they served their purpose. Anne was arrested, taken to the Tower of London, the very place where she had once celebrated her coronation only 3 years earlier. Now, those same stone walls would be her prison. A queen reduced to a prisoner. She would have heard the footsteps echoing in the corridors, the distant clanging of doors. She would have wondered which servants were still loyal, which friends had betrayed her. She would have seen her ladies-in-waiting weeping, or worse, refusing to meet her gaze. Anne maintained her innocence until the end. She denied every charge. Historians today are nearly unanimous. The evidence was laughable, the witnesses coerced. Yet in Tudor England, the trial was a formality. Her fate had already been sealed. On May 15, 1536, Anne was brought to trial at Westminster Hall. She stood before a jury of peers, many of whom despised her, and some who stood to profit directly from her fall. The outcome was never in doubt. Anne was found guilty. Her punishment, to be burned at the stake or beheaded at the king's pleasure. Henry, in what he likely thought an act of mercy, commuted the sentence to beheading, but he did not choose the traditional English axe. Instead, he sent for a French executioner, famed for his skill with a sword. Perhaps Henry thought this would be swifter, more elegant, or perhaps it was a final cruel reminder of Anne's years in France. Either way, her death was set. The morning of May 19, 1536 was heavy with silence. Anne had spent the night in prayer. We know this because her ladies recalled her composure, how she seemed almost serene, even as the shadow of death crept closer. Perhaps she clung to faith. Perhaps she forced herself into calmness to preserve some shred of dignity. When the lieutenant of the tower came to escort her, she greeted him with grace. She told him she was ready. Imagine the weight of those words. Ready to leave behind her daughter, Elizabeth, just a toddler. Ready to face the crowd waiting outside. Ready to kneel before a man who would take her life in a single stroke. As she stepped out into the courtyard, the murmur of the crowd swelled. Nobles craned their necks, commoners whispered, guards shifted their feet nervously. Everyone wanted to see the queen who had risen so high and fallen so far. Anne climbed the small wooden scaffold. Her hands were steady. She looked out at the sea of faces. And then she spoke. Her final speech survives, recorded by witnesses. It was not the furious condemnation some might expect. Instead, it was strangely measured, almost cautious. She praised Henry. She declared herself loyal. She asked the crowd to pray for him, their king. She did not protest her innocence directly, but she did not confess guilt either. Historians have long debated this. Was it genuine forgiveness, Or was it the survival instinct of a woman who knew her words could affect the fate of her family and her daughter? Either way, her words had power. Even in death, Anne remained poised, commanding, unforgettable. And then, the moment came. Anne removed her headdress and tucked her hair beneath a linen cap. She knelt upright, without the block that was customary in England. For the French method of execution, the condemned knelt tall, hands clasped in prayer, neck exposed. The French swordsman stood nearby, dressed plainly, his blade gleaming. He had been specially brought from Calais for this task. But here's the chilling detail. Anne did not see it coming. The executioner was trained to distract his victim, to strike before fear could overwhelm them. Witnesses say he called for his assistant to fetch his sword, pointing away as if it were not yet ready. And in that instant, as Anne turned her head slightly, he swung. One clean stroke. The blade severed her head from her body with such speed that some said the crowd gasped in disbelief before realizing it was over. Anne's body crumpled. Her head fell into straw laid carefully to soak the blood. Silence hung heavy over the courtyard. Then, slowly, the crowd began to murmur, shifting uneasily. Some crossed themselves, others stared. The Queen was dead. What happened next is perhaps the most disturbing detail of all. Anne's remains were not treated with royal dignity. No coffin had been prepared for her. Instead, her head and body were placed inside an old arrow chest, far too small, and buried hastily within the Tower grounds. For years, her grave was left unmarked, forgotten, hidden beneath stone. Her daughter, Elizabeth, was declared illegitimate. Her family scattered. Her enemies triumphed. And Henry? Just one day later, Henry VIII was betrothed to Jane Seymour. 10 days after Anne's execution, they were married. Think about that. Anne's blood had barely dried on the scaffold when her rival took her place beside the king. But Anne's story did not end in that grave. Her death cast a long, haunting shadow across England. Those who had cheered her downfall began to whisper uneasily. Some wondered if the king had gone too far. Others feared what it meant for the future, that if even a queen could be destroyed so swiftly, so brutally, no one was truly safe. Elizabeth, the daughter Henry had declared a bastard, would one day rise to the throne as Elizabeth I, one of the most powerful monarchs in English history. She carried her mother's sharp wit, her resilience, her fiery independence. In many ways, Elizabeth's reign became Anne's silent revenge. And today, nearly 500 years later, Anne Boleyn's execution still chills us, not just because of the injustice, but because of what it reveals about power, betrayal, and the fragility of human life at court. It is a reminder that behind the wells and crowns, history is filled with blood. Imagine the silence of the Tower at night, Anne lying awake on a hard bed, staring into the darkness. Every sound magnified, the scrape of boots on stone, the whisper of guards outside her chamber, the faint tolling of church bells in the city beyond. She must have replayed her life in fragments, the laughter of her youth in France, the thrill of Henry's first letters, filled with longing, the coronation procession when she was lifted high as queen, cheered by crowds. And then, the fall, the trial, the accusations, the look on Henry's face when he abandoned her. It's almost unbearable to imagine. Anne was no fool. She knew the charges were fabricated. She knew the trial was theatre. And yet, even in those last hours, she clung to dignity. Witnesses describe her as calm, devout, even cheerful at moments, as though determined to deny her enemies the satisfaction of seeing her break. But beneath the calm, the terror must have been immense. Because what greater cruelty is there than waiting for death, knowing the exact day and hour it will come? Anne's fall was not simply Henry's whim. It was a carefully orchestrated plot. Historians believe Thomas Cromwell, Henry's chief minister, engineered much of it. Cromwell had once been Anne's ally, but their relationship soured as they clashed over foreign policy and the distribution of church wealth after the break with Rome. By 1536, Cromwell saw Anne as an obstacle. Removing her would not only secure Henry's favour, but also clear the path for Jane Seymour. The charges, adultery, incest, treason, were chosen with precision. They painted Anne not only as unfaithful, but as monstrous, unnatural, a danger to the very stability of the kingdom. The men accused alongside her, musicians, courtiers, even her brother, were pawns sacrificed to seal her fate. All but one were executed. Their blood joined hers on the Tower grounds. This was not justice. This was state-sanctioned murder. And yet, the machinery of power spun on, unchallenged. Here's where history feels uncomfortably close. Think about it. A woman rises in power. She challenges norms. She speaks with confidence, refuses to be silent. At first, she is admired, even worshipped. But the moment she threatens the structures of authority, the system turns on her. Her flaws are magnified, her mistakes weaponized, her character shredded. Does that sound familiar? We see echoes of Anne's fate even today, in politics, in business, in media. Women who step too far outside the lines drawn for them are often torn down with ruthless efficiency. Their ambition is called arrogance. Their confidence is labeled hysteria. Anne's execution may belong to the 16th century, but the dynamics of power and betrayal are timeless. And that's why her story still haunts us, because it's not just about a queen who lost her head. It's about the cost of defying a system built to break you. Let's not forget Elizabeth. When Anne was executed, Elizabeth was just 2 years old. Branded illegitimate, stripped of her status, she could have faded into obscurity. But fate had other plans. Elizabeth grew into one of the most formidable rulers in history. She reigned for 45 years, overseeing the Elizabethan Golden Age. She defeated the Spanish Armada, fostered exploration, and left a legacy that reshaped England. Every time Elizabeth stood firm against her enemies, every time she wielded her intellect and charisma to command respect, she was echoing the strength of the mother she barely knew. In Elizabeth, Anne lived on, and in Elizabeth's triumphs, Anne's unjust death became, in a way, vindicated. There is one more detail, one that blurs the line between history and legend. For centuries, visitors to the Tower of London have reported strange occurrences, whispered voices, cold draughts, a figure of a woman in Tudor dress drifting near the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula, where Anne is buried. Some claim to have seen her headless ghost walking the tower's grounds, searching for the body from which she was torn. Are these just stories, woven from the collective guilt of a nation? Or is it history itself refusing to rest? Whatever the truth, Anne Boleyn's presence lingers, whether in ghostly form or in the minds of all who remember her. Think again of Anne's final words on that scaffold. She did not rage. She did not curse Henry. She spoke with grace, asking only that those present pray for the king. Why? Perhaps because she knew anger would be wasted. Perhaps because her silence was her last act of control, choosing dignity over despair. Or perhaps deep down, she believed her story was not finished. That history itself would remember her more kindly than the people who condemned her. And she was right. Henry VIII married 6 times. He executed 2 wives, cast aside 2 more, and left only 1 to survive him. Yet of all those women, it is Anne Boleyn whose name still burns brightest in our collective memory. Not because she died, but because of how she lived. Bold, intelligent, unapologetically ambitious in a world that demanded submission. Her silence on the scaffold was not weakness, it was a final act of defiance. Anne's story is, at its core, a warning about power. Power seduces, power corrupts, and power consumes. Henry VIII believed himself untouchable. He bent religion, politics, even morality to his will. Yet for all his might, he was never satisfied, always chasing, always destroying. And Anne, who once seemed to hold all the cards, discovered how fragile that power truly was. A crown can be snatched away, a reputation can be shattered, a life can end with a single stroke of steel. But here's the haunting truth. Power does not vanish. It shifts, it lingers, it passes to the next hand. In Anne's case, it flowed to her daughter, Elizabeth. Through her, Anne's story was not erased. It was transformed into something larger, something immortal. Picture this, one last time. The scaffold is empty now, the crowd disperses, the whispers fade, the tower stands silent once again. But beneath its stones, a queen lies buried in a simple grave, her body broken, her crown lost, her voice silenced. And yet, centuries later, we still speak her name. Anne Boleyn was meant to be erased. Instead, she became eternal. If this story moved you, if you felt the chill of history pressing close, remember, there are countless tales like Anne's, buried in the shadows, waiting to be told. So stay with us. Subscribe, like, and share, because history is not just about dates and battles. It's about lives, loves, betrayals, and the echoes they leave behind. And Anne Boleyn's echo still haunts us.